Hemingway said, the best way to find out if we can trust somebody is just to trust them. And as wise as that may sound, in business, that's not a recipe for success. We can't simply trust a new employee or vendor and find out if they're trustworthy in the end. We have to make judgments before we place our business and place our trust in people and companies. But if we use that same thinking in the reverse and ask the question, what's the best way to be judged by others, prospects, team members, leaders, as trustworthy, we might be tempted to say that the best way to be judged as trustworthy is simply to be worthy of trust. It's understandable that we'd think that, but if we do, we'd be dead wrong for 3 reasons. Number 1, trustworthiness is a judgment that other people make about us, independent of the skills or traits that make us really worthy of trust. Number 2, those judgments of our trustworthiness are based on people's first impressions of us. They make those judgments or first impression assessments about our trustworthiness in the milliseconds to minutes when they first meet us, often based on false signals. Yet we pay the price if we blow our first impression. Number 3, the skills of making a fantastic first impression are different from the skills and traits that make us actually worthy of trust in the end. And it's based on these 3 insights and many more that we have an enormous gap between how worthy of trust we really are and how much other people judge us to be trustworthy. As an example, imagine that trustworthiness can be measured on a scale from 1, I can't trust you as far as I can throw you, to 10, whatever your gold standard is for the most trustworthy human on earth. On that scale, reflect for a moment on your own worthiness for other people to trust you. Do you tell the truth? Mostly. Do you have good intentions towards others? Most of the time. And do you, by and large, make and keep your promises? If you do, I imagine you would give yourself a score of 8 or 9, or maybe even a 10. And that's probably accurate. However, if I asked you on that same scale, how much do you trust complete strangers? You may offer, as many people do, a rating of around 5 or less. And in fact, when people are surveyed to ask them how much they trust others based on their profession, it won't surprise you to learn that when people are asked, how much do you trust salespeople? The answer is often a 1, a 2, a 0, or sometimes even negative. And that makes sense. Perhaps we do trust some people highly to do the wrong thing. Different professions get an automatic trust rating or trust penalty. And what's really interesting to notice is that if most people judge strangers as a 5 out of 10, then most leaders are trusted even less than strangers. And at the bottom of the barrel are marketing executives and salespeople. But the question is, why are they so untrusted by the general public? And the answer is somewhat obvious. We believe that salespeople have hidden motives and that leaders have hidden agendas. When you first meet someone, in the milliseconds when you make that interaction, you're asking 2 questions. Who are you? The question of character. And what do you want? The question of motive. And unless someone provides you with answers to those 2 questions, we make up our own answers, and generally, it doesn't serve the person we're meeting. So what can we do about this? The first step, as it often is self-awareness. It's to understand that even though we may deserve a 9 out of 10 trustworthiness judgment or assessment, if we're in leadership, or we're a complete stranger, or worse, we're trying to convince someone to do, think, or buy something. We're playing the role of a salesperson, whether that's our job or not. We often get placed in a trust hole. A trust hole is the difference between how worthy of trust we really are versus how other people judge us to be. Step 2 is to understand that the trust hole has a massive consequence for us in our lives and in business. And in fact, it's that trust hole that explains the myth that trust takes time to build. Does trust build over time? Of course. But most trust is so-called identity trust, the trust we win or lose in the milliseconds to minutes when we first meet someone based on the first impressions that we create. And that is an enormous amount of trust that can be built in under 5 minutes. So why does it feel like trust takes so long to build? And why do so many people say that to themselves and others based on their lived experience? The answer? While we think we're building trust, what we're often doing is climbing out of a trust hole. And that does take a long time. Because when you step into or are put into a trust hole, everything you do and say will be judged through someone's lens. And if their lens has assessed you as untrustworthy, then everything you say will be tainted by that assessment. Then people will take months to watch you talk and act your way out of this hole until at some point they've seen enough evidence from you that they're ready to trust you enough to buy from you, hire you, or work with you. But why spend months when at least identity trust can be built in milliseconds to minutes? Now, to understand how people form their assessments or judgments of us, we have a formula for trustworthiness that says trustworthiness is the answer to 3 questions. Question number 1, can I believe you? The question of sincerity. Question number 2, can you do this? The question of competence. And question number 3, have you done this before? The question of reliability or track record. So far, so obvious. But what makes this formula profound is that trustworthiness is not the sum of these 3 factors, but the product. It's sincerity times competence times reliability. That's profound because if any one of these 3 factors is judged to be 0, then trustworthiness overall is 0. The second profound thing about this formula is that people tend to judge these factors in order from left to right. Therefore, if we meet someone new and all we do is jump in and talk about our competence and our track record, and they're still wondering, who are you and what do you want? The question of sincerity, then we'll put ourselves into a trust hole. The key question then is, how do we design our first impression so that people judge us to be sincere? They assess us to be people of character with good intentions. Now, before we answer that question, let's see what's at stake. And to do that, I'd like you to consider the billions of facts that you know. Imagine that the 20 or 30 or 40 billion facts in your head are represented by this pie chart. The answer to the question 2 plus 2, it's 4. The capital of Egypt, Cairo. The longest river in the world, the Nile. You have many of these facts, even some that are highly contentious. You might believe strongly that climate change is true or is fake. Now, I'm not interested in what you believe. I'm interested in how you came to believe that. For example, if you believe that climate change is true or false, did you fly to the North Pole, drill an ice core a mile deep, pull it up, do the analysis, and come to your conclusion? Or did you do what most of us do when it comes to knowledge acquisition? You read a book, you listened to a teacher, you watched a documentary or a YouTube or a TikTok. In other words, you relied on someone else's knowledge and you learned from them. And that is indeed the fast path to knowledge acquisition. But if you reflect on all of these facts that you know and ask yourself, what percentage, what sliver of this pie chart represent the facts that I learned firsthand through my life experience, and of course there are many, versus the facts that I learned from someone else. If you're like me, that will be a vanishingly small slice, perhaps less than 0.01% of all the facts that I think I know, I learned myself versus learning from someone else. What does that mean? Well, it speaks to a rule in life that says, as human beings, first we decide whom to trust, and that determines what we believe. Therefore, if you want your team, your customers, your loved ones to believe you, you have one job, which is to ensure that they trust you. Now, trust comes in many forms. There is the identity trust that we win or lose based on our first impression. There is trust that we build in conversation with people based on how we speak, what we say, how or if we listen with empathy, and how we manage the entire conversation. And of course, we can build trust over time by how we make and keep promises, how we restore trust when rather than if we break promises, the trust we build from our behavior, what we call habit-based trust. All three are important. But if you miss the opportunity to establish a high trust first impression, you may not get a chance to create conversational or habit-based trust. Now, for most people, we can agree that creating a high trust first impression is a skill. And I'm sure you will agree that skills are built through practice, ideally deliberate practice, preferably with a coach who knows what excellence looks like, who can give us high performance feedback. And the more we practice, the better we get at these skills. Therefore, if identity and other forms of trust building is a set of skills, and skills are built through practice, ask yourself, how many minutes in the last year, or perhaps the last decade, have we and our teams spent time deliberately designing, practicing, and polishing the skills that form our fantastic high trust first impressions? Or are we making it up as we go along? Because if we choose to simply make it up as we go along, that inaction is effectively signing up for being mistrusted by people based on our first impressions. And if they don't trust our first impressions, they're less likely to trust what we say and how we say it in conversations. And we may never even get the chance to demonstrate what's really worthy of trust in the end: our integrity, our honesty, our good intentions, and our ability to make and keep promises. Which brings us to the second myth. We believe that trust is won and lost in equal proportions, but as the famous saying goes, trust is built in drops and lost in buckets, meaning that trust is asymmetrical. And it's asymmetrical because if you're in a trust hole based on a poor first impression, then everything you say and everything you do will be judged through that lens. Think about it. If you've got a good friend who makes a mistake, you're likely to forgive them. But if you have a colleague that you don't trust who does exactly the same thing, you may punish them by removing them from your life, or certainly by putting them in a deeper trust hole. If you care to not only be trusted, but to grow your trust bank account so that you can build relationships that last through time, then there is an opportunity to distinguish between how people judge us and how trustworthy we really are, and to close that gap so that people can see us for who we really are and how trustworthy we really are. Now, this is not just an opportunity for each of us as individuals, whether we're in sales, in leadership, in finance, in IT. It doesn't really matter what our job is. If we're working with other people, then the currency of trust matters. But for an organization, the costs of inaction are enormous. When prospects and customers mistrust salespeople, it reduces our growth and our brand value. When employees or shareholders mistrust leadership, speed drops and innovation is stifled. And when employees mistrust each other in teams, turnover increases, disengagement skyrockets, and the cost of doing business rises. As an organization, if you're not climbing Mount Trustworthy, you're signing up for wallowing in a dam of doubt. But is it really worth the effort? Absolutely. We call the effort of developing the skills as an individual and as an organization of being trustworthy the trust advantage. Why? Because when prospects and customers trust our sales and success teams, they buy faster, they buy more, even when the product they're buying is at a premium to the market average. They stay longer and they highly recommend us to friends and colleagues. That's an enormous trust advantage. When employees trust leadership, they explore new opportunities, they feel safe to experiment, and innovation and speed increase as a result. And that's an enormous trust advantage. And finally, when employees trust each other, business speeds up, engagement increases, and the cost of doing business drops. That's an enormous trust advantage. Put that all together, and companies that are committed to owning the most trustworthy competitive mountaintop have an unfair and sustainable advantage over everyone else. But ask yourself this question. In our industry, can we identify the oldest company? I'm sure you can. The largest, the cheapest, the most innovative? All of these competitive mountaintops are owned by at least one player in your industry. But which company owns the most trustworthy competitive mountaintop? If not, that's an unclaimed opportunity. And if you claim it and own it with integrity, it will bring you an enormous advantage to your business. Trust is not just a currency in metaphor. It is the currency of value for businesses. So how do you gain for yourself and for your organization your trust advantage? By working on the skills and habits that allow you to create high trust first impressions, to build trust through conversations, and to earn trust through your behavior and habits over time. At Habits at Work, we have built a Trust Advantage Leadership Cohort to help you learn the knowledge, practice the skills, and create the habits that define the most trustworthy people in every room, every day. This is a 12-month-long open enrollment cohort for people who are serious about claiming their trust advantage. It's for high-performing individuals, whether you're customer-facing, in leadership, or indeed in any role in an organization where your relationships with other people, internal or external, really matter. How do we do that? By focusing on the 3 pillars of trust. Identity trust, built through great first impressions. Conversational trust, based on how we design and lead conversations. And habit trust, based on how we behave. Over 12 months, we bring to life a series of research-based high-trust behaviors and skills. We do that in monthly 2-hour live virtual skills workshops. However, gaining the skill doesn't guarantee that you'll practice it. Therefore, every 2 months, we offer a 1-hour group coaching and practice session to help you turn new skills into habits. Every quarter, each person in the program enjoys a half an hour one-on-one live virtual coaching session to really hone in on your own individual skills based on the learning over the last quarter. Finally, to support the program is a community and care package, a Slack channel, habit guides, videos to help you remember and bring this work to life, and lots more besides that. Your trust advantage is the currency in your trust bank account that you can invest in building strong internal and external relationships that will serve you in your life and your career. And more importantly, if practiced together with other people in your organization, give you the recipe for owning the most trustworthy organization in your industry. I hope you'll join us.